But it says, if my people who are called by my name, then it says, shall humble themselves and pray. It's very important for us to humble ourselves and to pray. Because of time, I'm not going to go so much into that. And seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. Then will I hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. When it talks about healing the land, this is actually a concept that we can spend hours on. Because everything as it relates to production for human beings, outside of intellectual capacity and outside of human ingenuity and human work, everything outside of ourselves, everything is found in the land. I can provide a service with you. I can provide a service for you and not particularly use the land. But it'd be very hard for me to provide that service with you. Other than maybe counseling where we talk with each other. And even then we use the land because you usually don't go to counseling and stand up and look at each other. You usually sit down in the seat. And the seat was built from iron that was manufactured, or from wood that was cut down. The land was used to present a room or a place for comfort so you can produce counseling where you can talk with each other. And even though counseling itself is a human resource and not a natural resource, everything that makes counseling comfortable is a natural resource. So the reason I'm getting to this is because everything that produces wealth comes from the land. And because everything that produces wealth comes from the land, from a secular point of view, if you don't control the land, you don't have power. The secular economist teaches that land ownership is the thing that empowers people. That if you rent a facility, or if you are homeless, or if you do not produce finances, then you don't have power over land. The secular stock market evaluates businesses based upon the cash that it brings in and the assets that it accumulates. So in the mind of the secular mind, a human being that does not have financial power or a title deed to land, they have less power than those who have title deed. The problem with that is that God doesn't actually agree with that philosophy. God says, if my people, my nation, who is called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then would I hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. Now, in Israel, even at that time, there were people who had larger parts of land and smaller parts of land. But the healing of the land was not dependent upon your economic value. The healing of the land was dependent upon who you were in God. And what I recognize that where God is starting to help me to see things differently is that we have to pull ourselves away from the secular way of thinking and put ourselves into the spiritual way of thinking. Now, Elijah, he had a situation in Israel. And in the situation with Israel, the prophets of Baal were propagating their God in the land of Israel. Now, the land of Israel was ruled by a king by the name of Ahab and a queen by the name of Jezebel. So from a secular point of view, all of the land of Israel, the northern kingdom, to some extent, it belonged to Ahab and Jezebel. To some extent, it belonged to the prophets of Baal. If you want to take it literally, it belonged to the people of Israel. But it did not belong to Elijah. Elijah did not have the title deed to the land of Israel. He might have had a portion of land that belonged to him, but the whole entire land did not belong to Elijah. From a financial perspective, he didn't have the mortgage of Israel. He had the mortgage maybe of his little piece of land, if he even had any land, but he didn't have the mortgage of Israel. But when the time came And Elijah was to exercise spiritual authority. He understood that the land did not belong to Ahab. The land did not belong to Jezebel. The land did not belong to the prophets of Baal. The land didn't even belong to the people of Israel. The land belonged to the God who created it. So because God created it, even though Elijah didn't have the title deed to it, he had ownership over it. He had dominion over it. He had authority over it. He could speak to the land not because he had money in the bank, but he could speak to the land because the land belonged to God. When the church begins to understand that our land doesn't belong to us because we paid for it. It's not the mortgage that makes me own my land. I could stand in the middle of a home I don't even own. And if I have enough faith to believe it, and if I have enough people outside not to try to hinder me, I can actually take leadership and ownership of land that I don't even own. I'm not even renting it. And the reason why I can take ownership of it is because it belongs to God. What do I mean by that? If there are people that are shooting on the street, killing people, I have a right to stand in that neighborhood if I believe that neighborhood belongs to me, even if I don't have a dollar in that neighborhood. I have the right to believe that because this neighborhood belongs to you, God, and because it belongs to you, belongs to me, I'm tired of people shooting in this neighborhood because it belongs to us. And because it belongs to us, I'm going to, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves, I'm going to humble myself. I'm going to pray. I'm going to seek your face. I'm going to turn from my wicked ways. Then I know you'll hear from heaven, that you'll forgive the sin of that community, that you'll forgive the sin of my community, that you'll heal my land. There is an empowerment that comes beyond financial empowerment. And in fact, it's like this. At the end of the day, there is a covenant that is made when you pay for something. So I'm not discounting the covenant that you make when you pay for something. But I've been in houses where people pay the mortgage and other people who do not pay the mortgage control and own the house. Because so long as the one who has the financial authority doesn't have the spiritual authority, then the house is vacant of ownership. And the thing I'm trying to say is evil people walk into people's house and take control. Then why in the world, if I'm a good person and I know the will of God and I know the call of God and I have a promise from God that I'm covenanted to him, why would I not take control of the land and the areas that God has presented before me? So someone says, I just don't believe. That's how come the Lord said, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray. You see, it's a humbling thing to not be able to own property. But it's an even more humble thing to recognize I don't have to own it to rule it. Because what God is saying to us is that there is a responsibility of bringing the kingdom of God into the earth. And if we make it completely financial, then there are many facets of this earth that will never be touched by the people of God. But if you can begin to roll back the veils of secularism and begin to see things with the Spirit of God and say, you know what? I can pray for communities that I'm attached to. And I can expect to see God work miracles through those communities. I can live in a home that I'm renting. And I can pray for the presence of God to take over that place. And for God's Spirit to be in there just as much or even more than it's in the church. Because any place that I am, any place that you are, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then would I hear from heaven, forgive their sins and heal their land. I've never had somebody come to an altar call and say, Pastor, pray that my land is healed. And the reason why we don't do that is because we've been conditioned to believe that the only thing we have ownership over is ourselves. But the devil has conditioned his people to believe that the only thing they have ownership over is everything. And we have to get to the place to say, I'm not talking about being greedy. I'm not talking about trying to be rich. I'm not talking about those things. I'm trying to talk about that you have ownership of your life. And there are things in your life that are going to try to bring you down, are going to try to make you feel as if you're not significant, are going to try to make you feel as if your life doesn't matter. But you have to get to the place to recognize that your life does matter. And you do have ownership of your life. And in fact, God has empowered you to take authority in your city. God has empowered you to take authority in your environment, that your environment needs to be holy. Not because you tell somebody about it. It's because you have gotten so close to God, you spend so much time with God, that you start to become like Him. And holiness is emitted from you. And it pushes a person to respond. When I'm in a room with a person who is rude and mean and out of order, their behavior pushes me to respond. And what I'm praying for God is I'm praying that God can make me and that God can make you so good, so loving, so kind, so much like Him, that it pushes those that are around you to respond. I don't want people to say good things about me just because they're ignoring the bad things about me. I want to become the kind of person that you don't have to edit and change up things in my life. You can actually just speak about who I really am. And out of that, someone can see that person was with God. And that's what I want for you. I want for you to get to the place that even when you're by yourself and there's nobody around you, no one to encourage you, no one to talk about how good you are or to say anything like that, that you can sit down in a room by yourself and say, you know what, I'm not perfect, but I don't have to chronicle everything out of my life to have a decent story. I believe God. And because I believe God, I pray for God to be in my house. Because I believe God, when I'm at work, I pray for the Spirit of God to be at my workplace. As a matter of fact, it's so funny. Sometimes we're not even praying for these things, and God is doing these things. Majority of people that are here, if you're to check out your work history, and you see the blessing that comes upon your business, now they may say it's a good time, or they may say the economy is going well, but it wasn't going well before you were there. Some of our businesses are blessed, and we haven't even prayed for them. Some places that we're working are blessed, and we haven't even prayed for them. But all I'm saying in this message is for us to get to the place to recognize that when we submit to God, we have a promise that He will heal the land that's around us. And because He will heal the land that's around us, we need to point our prayers to life situations around us and to begin to pray for the will of God to be done on the earth.